now. Just a couple of technical issues first. If you have any technical challenges, please chat Q&A to Jessica. And if you have any content questions that you want to answer, have answered, please chat those to Justine. We have the direct cost section has generated a lot of questions, both in the indirect cost section and just in general. So we are going to really drive down today on a lot of actual content. And so the questions you chat in today will be answered during the office hours next week, because we really just want to make sure we get as much content in today, because it's a pretty content-rich lesson on direct costs. So again, I want to welcome everybody to our cost thing on direct costs today. We're talking a little bit about last week's webinar, review the action steps, then we're going to go through direct costs. Dave and Julie are going to really walk us through what direct costs are, and then what direct costs are for direct care versus fee-for-service staff, and then some of the complicated questions that we've gotten in the office hours last week, as well as in the indirect cost section, had to do a lot with indirect care costs related to staff who either see both clients and don't see clients and those kinds of things. So they're going to spend some special time today just really talking about those issues, because they've raised a lot of questions on people's part overall in the last couple of weeks. So we want to really make sure we devote some time specifically to that issue. Then we're going to talk about some action steps going forward, and then we're going to wrap up. And specifically when we wrap up today, Justine's also going to talk a little bit about the discussion board and walk people through that a little bit. So we want to leave enough time at the end to be able to do that today. In regards of the action steps from last week, really we're very hopeful that you were able to review your indirect cost section of the benchmarking tool with your core team. We got a lot of questions via the survey and chat last week. So we were very pleased by that, and also around updating your quick analysis tool, and starting to begin to really start playing with that, and then also signing up for the discussion board. So we're going to do the polling questions a little bit different today. What we've done in the background is we're going to post, and you'll see them on the side of your screen now. We're going to post all the polling questions at once, so that when you answer them, you don't have to wait for them to clear 3 times. So the first polling question is, did you log in alone or as part of your core team? So you have 3 options there: log in by yourself, with up to 4 people, or more than 5 people, if you could just answer that question, and then also kind of identify yourself by who you are and what role you have. And then, do you feel you understand how direct costs affect your clinic? So if you just take a minute to answer those questions. I think after a minute passes, Evelyn, if you could just shut down the poll and show us the results, that'd be fantastic. So we're going to wait till we hit a minute on the poll, and then we'll shut them down and let it figure out the results, and then we'll get back right back to you with those results, and then dive more into the meat of the thing. Okay, so Evelyn, why don't we shut it down? All right, we'll just wait. We're going to, at some point, get the Jeopardy music in here. At some point, get the Jeopardy music in here and start to deal with it that way. Okay. So it looks like about 50% of folks are logged in by themselves. Another 16% of folks have other people with them, which is, so about 20% have other people with them and are logged in together as a group, which is fantastic. We're really excited when that happens. And then we're split, more folks with clinic leadership staff than others. And then most people have a sense that they kind of understand what direct costs are. And a small group is also saying they want to certainly need a little more help in that area. So I think with that, we'll turn off the poll and move on. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Dave and Julie, and they are going to take it from here. So let me find that. Hold on one second, folks. For some reason, when we did the poll, wait. Oh, there we go. All right. When the poll was going, I couldn't pass the baton. Okay, so Dave now has the baton, and Dave, if you can get started, we'll pass it to you. Sorry about the hiccup there. Dave and Julie?
You know, Andy, this is Justine. I think that it looks like their phone got disconnected briefly, so...
okay, so we're just going to wait 1 minute for them to get dialed back in, and they should be hopefully joining us very shortly. Sorry, folks, for this little hiccup here. Technology is grand when it works, but when it doesn't work, you know, we have these kinds of challenges. So hopefully Dave is dialing back in right now, and we should hopefully have him on the line momentarily, and then we will get started with the content portion of the webinar.
Andy, can you hear me now?
Yes. Oh, well, yeah, we got you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that. I had put myself on mute and I didn't come back. So.
Okay. Well, there we go.
Well, good. Well,
you are now back. We can hear you, and you should have control, so you should be able to take it from here.
All right. Thank you. I apologize, everybody. My name is David Warsnick. I'm Chief Financial Officer of Spectrum Human Services in Western New York, and primary author on the benchmarking model, of which we're going to be taking a look today at the direct care costs section, and I'm going to let Julie introduce herself.
Hi, welcome. I'm Julie Gutowski, Managing Director of Clinical Operations at Spectrum Human Services, and I'm fortunate enough that I get to work closely with David. My responsibilities primarily look at the clinical operations, and then when I need assistance with finance or numbers, I have the luxury of coming in and getting David's assistance.
Thank you for your kind words. As Andy had said, there was a lot of questions that got raised last week regarding indirect care and direct care costs, and we're going to spend some time talking about that pretty explicitly. But I want to circle back a little bit and really speak very briefly to why we do a differentiation between direct and indirect care costs. As Julie and Andy talked 2 weeks ago and last week in the office hours, we really have a structure where we take those costs that are not directly related to the provision of services, and we try to quantify that. And the question is, well, why would you do that? What real difference does it make? Well, it has a very important function. It's really a sort of a broad stroke measure of how efficiently you're using your resources that are not directly involved in providing care to your clients. We spend a lot of time looking at efficiencies on the clinical side. We look at productivity, we look at quality of notes, we look at billed hours to paid hours. We have all these quantitative measures as it relates to the provision of services. But if somebody asked you and said, well, how productive are you in those costs that are not related to service, there's no really good measure. So what we try to do is we develop a measure that's what percentage of your costs, or those resources that you need, are being directly related to providing services, and what portion of those costs are not. And that gives you an idea, although a higher level view, but some view of how productive you are in using those costs. The other reason that we take a look, obviously, at the indirect care cost side is as more and more resources go into those non-clinical services, it puts more and more of a burden or a strain on your clinical side of the shop. So It's an important distinction. It's not a perfect distinction, as we'll talk about today, but in some very broad ways, it's an extremely important difference. So today we're going to be looking at two of the tabs, and we're going to be spending most of our time actually in the benchmarking model, showing you some examples, walking through your inputs, and hopefully give you a better feel for how you can put the benchmarking tool into play. So the one tab that we'll be looking at is the employee direct care costs, and the other we'll be doing is looking at the contracted direct care costs. So a definition. This is not a wonderful definition, but it's really what we try to incorporate into that. And the direct care cost is really the wages and the fringe benefits and your contracted staff costs associated with the provision of clinical services. I'm going to go into much more detail because I'd really like to spend most of the time showing you what that means. Now, there are some additional definitions in the slides that will be posted with this webinar after we're done. Instead of having me walk through the definitions, I'm going to hop over to the actual tool and we'll go through the definitions while we're looking at the tool, and you'll have the PowerPoint as reference. So let me take a second here to share my desktop.
David, could I ask you this? So when we really started out on this process and finalizing productivity and the standards using the different tools, we really looked at what are the activities or expectations we have for the clinical staff versus support staff. And so from what you're telling me, I guess that's important to know, because if we have clinical staff doing responsibilities that support staff could do, then they're less able to bill and provide clinical services, which supports us financially and allows us to provide the services.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Let me show you a little example about that. So you see the benchmarking model tool, and right now I'm going to go to the model analysis page, which is the primary page. And you'll see that this is a little upstate clinic here, and the clinic's breaking even. And this is the first example. Say, though, we have a clinic that is losing money. This is a small clinic, and it's losing $25,000. And we've got the percentage of direct care cost to total cost is 57%. You have a pretty well-run operations, but say the clinic has been taking a look at the webinars here, and they're thinking about that. What they want to do is they want to put centralized scheduling in. So what they have is they have these non-clinical functions, which is scheduling and calling people up and leaving people messages and having them call you back and having you call them back. All the time that is necessary, that is moved outside of their direct clinical work, that is put over is really an indirect cost that doesn't support their provision of services. So say we're a clinic and we say, geez, we'd really like to do centralized scheduling, but we don't have a lot of support staff to do that. So I said, well, what would happen if we went over into our indirect costs and added a half-time position for an administrative assistant? So what we're going to see here when we go over to our model is before we were losing 25,000, but now we're losing 49. But we're going to say by hiring that half-time support staff and taking all those scheduling, those telephone calls, all the rigmarole that goes through with making appointments, taking it away from our clinical staff, we think that we can move our billable hours to paid hours from 55% to 60%. So we went from a clinic that was losing $25,000, we took all of those indirect activities of scheduling, took them away from our clinicians, gave them more time to provide service, and even though we increased our indirect costs a little bit, by increasing the productivity, we're able to increase the viability of the clinic. So that's a sort of an example of where we want to separate the non-clinical activities as much as possible and move them into the support staff. And you'll see here we're still at a very robust 56% of all of our costs going into direct care services.
So really, just by adding the half-time support staff, which costs less than adding a half-time clinical staff member, we can really increase the billed services and income coming in and the services we're providing.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for use of the model is to understand the balance between your indirect costs and your direct care costs. And I think a lot of us sit down and we think the fact that you don't want to increase your costs, particularly in an area that doesn't generate billable services. But the example that I just showed you is that that's not the way we should be thinking about this. We should be thinking about a good balance between our indirect and our direct care costs. So let's move on a little bit, and we'll start with we're going to start with the employee direct care. We've really broken down our staff into two groups. One is those individuals that are actually employed by the agencies. They will get a W-2 at the end of the year. They're normally available for all the fringe benefits. They have a leave time benefit. They're truly a staff. The second group that we've broken down to, and that will be in a second tab, is what we're calling contracted or fee-for-service staff. Those are not employees. They do not get a W-2. They will be getting a 1099 at the end of the year. They're not normally eligible for the same benefits as the staff are. And as we talk about this, you'll see why this is an important distinction. So, as our all of our models are set up, is that the yellow areas are input areas. The blue areas are areas that are generated by formula. So in this case, we're taking a look at our employee staff. The first input, which is required, is the fringe expense as a percentage of gross pay. That's defined as a percentage derived by dividing total mandated and non-mandated fringe benefit costs into your personal services costs. One way of thinking about this, and those mandated and non-mandated fringe are your health care, dental, if you do life, pension, unemployment, compensation, employer's portion of FICA. It's all those costs that are required and are part of the benefit package that you provide for your employees. 25%, we've seen those run as much from 25 to, in some cases, over 50%. And one of the ways of thinking about this, at a 25%, we pay 25 cents for every dollar of salary that we pay. And that's an important piece because it varies across clinic, and it also drives a significant portion of the cost in the model. The second piece that is required is the number of work weeks, or number of hours in your work week. We see it normally at 35, 37.5, or 40. Those are pretty straightforward. The other input areas here, you will see we have a section to put each of your staff in. You can either put them in aggregate and put the average salary for those positions, or you can put them in individually. It's really designed to go either way. So what we have here is We have an area where you can put a name. In this case, starting with registered nurse, I just put nurse. The next field is for salary. The salary is an amount an individual would earn if they worked a normal work week for a full year. So even though you may have a nurse that is part-time, this salary needs to be the dollar amount that that person would make if they worked a normal work week for a normal year. It's your annualized rate, basically. The second is your FTE. And the FTE is a full-time equivalent. The value is equal to 1 for a staff that works a normal work week for a full year. And then this is prorated for staff who work less than full-time. So if this nurse had been working half-time, then we would just put a 0.5 in there. You'll see this. We didn't change the salary. That would be the annualized rate. That would be the rate she would make or he would make if they worked a full year. But this is the amount of time that they actually work. Independent of whether they're doing indirect or direct, it's the amount of time that they're going to get paid. So we'll put that back to 1. The next input field on this is the what's called supervision, yes, no. That is really used to indicate if a staff has an indirect care responsibilities and therefore carry a reduced productivity expectation. So here's let me give you an, so it's just an indicator. It doesn't drive the model. If you forget to put yes in there or you don't put anything in there, it's not going to make a difference, but it's just a check. If you have a yes as an indicator here, then you should see something less than 100% in the next field. Percentage of direct care stuff. For those staff that have a Y indicator, you have to input the percentage of their time that they are expected to provide direct care services. Let me give you an example, and then Julie can talk about it. So here we have a nurse. The nurse, if that nurse had worked full-time, she would make, or he would make $45,000. This person happens to be a full-time equivalent. They have a yes indicator, so they have an expectation of 75% of their time they are providing direct care costs. In this example, you may have an example of the other 25%. This person may have responsibilities for utilization review or quality assurance, as an example. So this person may not be providing supervision, but this person has a reduced productivity expectation, and that reduced productivity expectation is they have an expectation which is 25% less than is normal for the clinic. That's a way of thinking about this. So let's maybe go down and talk a little bit about somebody who is actually a clinical supervisor.
So really, the direct services are all the billed services such as individual sessions, crisis intervention, complex care management, family therapy, collateral, health monitoring. The direct services that we're looking at, the percent direct care, are those billed services. And how we look at and determine that percent, things you would consider might be number of staff that a supervisor is reviewing their work. Do they have any kind of other roles? As David said, is there any UR or QA roles? Are they helping develop programmatic resources? Are you going from a mental health clinic that primarily does individual sessions, and now you're interested in really building up the group work? And so you have some clinicians or supervisors working on evidence-based practices and group development.
Yeah, the important piece is that those are regularly scheduled time that you basically said your skills and need to be directed in areas other than providing direct therapeutic and other services to our clients, and we therefore are going to reduce the productivity expectation that that you have. Now, one of the things that you need to take a look at, and I'll show you the model, and one of the things that Julia talked about is how do you determine how much of a caseload, or if your supervisor should carry a caseload. There's a couple of things that we throw into the mix when we make that decision. Is that we, first of all, we have a little schedule that your productivity is reduced based upon the number of individuals that you supervise. And it's, the supervisors know what it is, and it's a predetermined schedule. We built the model a little bit off of some of the work that David Lloyd had done with his MTM services. The other piece we take into consideration is whether they have additional supervisory responsibilities, say, to supervise the secretaries or the operation of a site, as an example. And so there's no rocket science here. You take a look at what you believe the time that they need to do for them to devote to these other services, and then reduce their productivity. I do want to show you, though, what kind of an effect it may have. Now, here in our employee costs, we have this individual. We have a social worker. It's a full-time position, making $40,768. And what we're saying is that 80% of that individual's time is actually in providing services, and only 20% of the time is appropriate for their clinical supervision. Well, let's see what would happen. Let's go back to our model analysis, and under this circumstance, well, let's go back and take us back to where we were, and one second real quick. I'm going to go back and take my indirect costs. I'm going to put this person back to 1. I'm going to go back to the model, and I'm going to put this back to 55%. Oops, 57.2. Okay. And one of the things that we really want you to see in the model is the model. It's a model. It's a way that you can approximate reality, and then go in and try things out. A couple weeks ago, when we talked about the quick analysis tool, we talked about it as a sandbox. It's a place you can play, a place you can see how your decisions may play out under ideal, or you can model less than ideal circumstances. So here we have a clinic that's breaking even, and this individual over in our direct care, our supervisor, is 80%. If we had said, no, we really think that supervision is much more important than that, and this individual should be spending only 10% doing direct care, and the other 90% should be directed towards providing support services for our staff. If you then go over to the model analysis, this is not an insignificant variable. This is a fairly sensitive variable. And one of the reasons it's sensitive is in most clinics, we promote our good staff. And we promote the staff who have a lot of experience. And we promote the staff who have been here for a long period of time. And the reality is that those are our most expensive staff. So when you take your most expensive staff and you drive down their productivity expectation, it has a fairly significant effect in the model. Now, I probably drove this down a little bit too far, and we would expect it would maybe sit to be more like even 50%. Oops, 50%. Oh, that's 500, sorry. 50%, let's go back to the model. You'll see even at 50%. So as we were talking about using the model to figure out the balance between your indirect and direct costs on the global level, you can also use the model to find the balance between your indirect costs and your direct care costs at the individual staff level also. And this is where we play those different scenarios out.
And so it seems very important that you need to take a realistic look at the expectations you have for supervisors and staff with other responsibilities while trying to maintain the bottom line, which is fiscal viability and breaking even, because if you had moved the productivity expectation from 57.2% and let's say, I think we can realistically do 70%, I really don't think 70% is realistic, it'll give me that we're making money and we're doing well, but I don't know that it's feasible or reasonable that people are going to be able to achieve that. And so some of the ways that we looked at when we're looking at the productivity expectations for supervisors or other staff who have additional responsibilities, how can they continue to contribute, because the reality is if they're a supervisor, they were probably a very skilled clinician who is good at engagement, who not only met productivity but probably exceeded it. So how do you still get that person to be able to provide and teach the other staff who may need some guidance and assistance in those areas the ability to hit productivity when they can't spend their entire day providing billed services? So some things that we had thought about is that the supervisors could potentially do assessments only or run groups, cover walk-in clinic, carry a smaller caseload. Those are some of the strategies we looked at in trying to help the supervisors hit their productivity while understanding that providing supervision to staff isn't only the hour that you're scheduled in the week to meet with that staff member.
Great. Thanks, Shirley. One of the things, and this is an important point, where the confusion comes in, I think, with this direct and indirect care breakout is that we sit there and we take a look at our clinical staff. We have an LCSW and their full-time staff. Well, we do know that they do other things. They write notes, they participate in supervision, they make phone calls, they do other activities that are not directly involved with providing clinical services. We do not break those out as indirect care costs. First of all, it would be an extremely difficult thing to do because it varies. So if you do concurrent documentation, then there's no paperwork time outside of your session. If you don't do it, then there's paperwork time. So it's trying to tease out those indirect care costs and direct care costs at the individual clinical staff level is a very difficult thing to do. So we move one step up from that and we say, okay, if you have a clinical staff where we're going to make the differentiation is we're going to make the differentiation as it relates to regularly scheduled activities that they are providing for the clinic that results in a reduction in their productivity expectation. And it's important not only to the operations of your clinic, but it's also important to the model because it affects the unit of service productivity that the model generates. So, as I said when we first started, it's not a perfect distinction, but I think it approximates the indirect to the direct care costs pretty well. Now, we're going to need to move on to the second tab on this, and this is for your fee-for-service or your contracted staff. This piece is a little bit different. So I want to go through a couple of the additional elements here. One of the things you'll see is this little box up in the right-hand corner. It's called an hours worked FTE converter. It's really simple, so you don't have to sit there and say, let's see, we have a 40-hour work week and this person works an average of 12.5 hours. What is FTE is that? You just put 12.5 hours in here, and based upon your normal work week, it'll tell you what your FTE is. It's that simple. It's just so you don't have to figure that out yourself. So you'll see as we move down, again, it's the same kind of setup. In this case, instead of an annualized salary, you're going to put an hourly rate because your contracted staff and your fee-for-service that don't have an annual rate. An annual rate is for your staff. They're really being paid based upon the services that they're providing. And in this case, we're calling it an hourly rate. Now, if you have, say, a contracted social worker and you're paying them by completed visits, then the hourly rate would be the dollar value you're paying them for completed visits. What we see is models that people are either paid by the hour, and that's usually with nurse practitioners and psychiatrists. We've also seen a model where you're paid for a completed unit, and we usually see that with the social workers or with other licensed mental health professionals. So that's an important distinction here. FTE is FTE. It's the same kind of what you do. It's based upon the average number of hours that the individual is paid per week. So if you're paying a social worker for a completed visit, well, they may complete 30 visits one week and 29 visits the next week and 15 because of no-shows and cancellations of their own schedule. It's a model. We can't adjust for those minor variances. So put in the average number of hours that they're paid during a week. Or if you don't know what you anticipate it to be, and then as you gain better knowledge about that, you can circle back to the model and be more precise. We have the same kind of a thing as a supervisor, yes, no, and again, it's an indicator. So what we have here is a physician, a psychiatrist, that has 85% direct cost. Well, you may say, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Well, one of the things you have to consider when you work with your contracted staff or your fee-for-service staff, are you actually paying them for time that is not involved in providing billable services? And with your psychiatrist, the answer most likely will be yes. You'll have your psychiatrist who would be expected to review and sign off on treatment plans. You may have your psychiatrist attend case conferences. You could do grand rounds, for goodness sake, and you could have an expectation that your psychiatrist makes presentations or works with your staff presentations. It's important in your direct care, or your contracted staff, that you capture those times that you're paying your staff for not providing services. And this is an important piece to look at because you'll see that our psychiatric and nurse practitioner staff tend to be our more expensive staff as it relates to the provision of care. So if we had a psychiatrist and we said, okay, 15% of your time is doing all those other things, and this model breaks even, if that was in fact just 5% less, let's go over and see what that model shows us. That's a $13,000 loss. So it's a relatively important variable for the model to be a good predictor and for you to be able to manage those high-level costs more efficiently.
And so, David, correct me if I'm wrong, what you need to be thinking about is what is feasible and to be generated in an hour for the consultant. Mm-hmm. The doctor's reimbursement rates for their services is a bit higher than the social worker. Or we have started at Spectrum using nurses and providing some health services as well, and those reimbursement rates are substantially lower than the doctor. So you need to consider in an average hour what is feasible or reasonable that the contracted employee would be able to do, also considering an average no-show rate.
Right. So if you take a look, what I've split over here is to the CPT tab. Well, you see the ratings, or the weightings, and it's clear that your psychiatrists in an hour have a greater ability to provide additional revenue because of the higher rates for their services. And we'll be doing a webinar specifically related to CPT and weights and service mix and those kind of things. But you make an extremely important point is that an ability for, say, a nurse to generate units if they're doing health monitoring, which is a very low CPT weight, versus you psychiatrists who could get a relatively robust weight for a 30-minute assessment, which is different from your social worker who may only get a weight of 0.6 for the same 30 minutes. So this becomes an important function here is your CPT weights per direct care hour, and it's very important. So if you're paying, it sort of speaks to the model that you're paying your social work staff. So if you say, okay, we're going to pay you for a completed hour or service and we're going to pay you $45, and you don't differentiate between a 30-minute visit and a 45-minute visit, that makes a significant difference, because in this case, if you could just generate, you pay them a full hour for a clinical, for a 30-minute visit, which is a weighting of 0.6, and you run back to our model, you can see we're seeing significant changes in the cost structure. So it's important as you think about how you use your contracted staff, is that how you pay them and what your unit of service expectation is for each of those hours that you're going to be paying them.
And so for higher salary or higher hourly rate contract employees, it's important that you have a higher CPT weight so you can afford the prescriber, the doctor, nurse practitioner. And if you have a higher cost employee, a small change can have a significant impact.
So in this case, so you'll see that we've added the difference between these two tabs, again, is an hourly rate for your contracted staff versus an annual rate. Your FTE is the same, your supervisor indicator is the same. In most cases, probably your contracted social work staff would be 100% clinical, and unless you have a contracted staff that you pay them additional hours for URQA, I mean any of those kinds of things. Case review, anything like that. So you would need to be able to accommodate that here. Take a very close look at what your CPT expectation is related to the hour that you're paying them, and build it into the model, and you get an idea then of how these pieces interact. One last thing that I did want to show you, we do a summary on each of the tabs here. This is related to this page. You'll see in this tab we have 3.5 direct care, 0.15 indirect care. You'll see where the costs are, and you'll also see what units are generated and what your unit cost is for your contracted staff. The same thing will happen for your employee direct care. You get the portion of the direct, the indirect, the total staff. You'll see your cost. You'll see your fringe benefits. We don't do a unit cost here. You'll see your unit cost over in your model analysis. And of course, on your indirect care cost page, we do a summary of all your staffing. So I hope we answered some of the questions that came up related to indirect and direct care costs, particularly as it relates to staff. So the model really, the piece that we want to emphasize, the model is used to design the balance. It's different for every clinic. It's the balance between efficient use of your resources associated with non-billable therapeutic time and the efficiency of those resources that are dedicated to the provision of service. The model allows you to do that globally at an operational level, and it also allows you to drill down and find that same balance as it relates to your individual staff level. So I hope we answered some questions. As Andy had said earlier, please chat any of your questions. And both Julie and I will be at office hours next week. If you get your questions in, we'll certainly review them beforehand, and we'll be available to address those. We're going to try to make that meeting next week a bit more didactic to be able to answer your questions directly. So I hope that we will be seeing, or I'm not seeing you, I'm talking to you then. I'd like to thank Julie for helping us out today with this presentation. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my Excel model, and I'm going to pass this along to, back to Andy, I believe. You all set, Andy?
Sorry about it. I started talking to you guys while it still was on mute. So, so thank you very much, Dave and Julie. This was really fantastic in terms of explaining. Sorry, I'm just going back and forth. In terms of explaining all the different issues that are there with direct costs, and I think this is one of the areas where you really can. A lot of the questions we get more generally are about, where do I put my staff? And this is where you put your staff. So it's very, very good to kind of lay all that out and exactly how you manage that. So we have one more polling question to do before we jump ahead to Justine, who's going to walk us through the other thing. And that polling question is, do you think your CIT has the information they need to complete the direct cost section of the benchmark? So benchmarking tool. So Evelyn, if we just give people about 25 seconds or so, and then let them answer that question, and then we will report out those results, and then we'll move ahead. We'll move ahead to the next portion of the webinar. Okay, so imagine the Jeopardy music in your mind, and we've locked down the webinar, so we're just waiting for the results. So about half of folks say yes, and about 15% of folks say that they're either not sure or know that they still need a little more help to get there. So again, we're absolutely on board with folks being on the office hours next week, and we'll be answering some of those questions then. So thank you for that. Action steps before the next webinar. We had a little typo in our thing, but really, review the direct cost section with your staff. Start to fill that in. I think the best way to know what questions you're going to have is to actually fill in the direct cost tabs that Dave and Julie went through, and that'll kind of highlight many of the questions that you're going to have. I think that's the best way to do it. And then, if you have questions, send them here to us. Fill out the survey, send those questions into us. Both Dave and Julie will be on with us next week. And then with that, I'm going to pass this back to Justine. Justine, if you can take it back. For some reason, the pass button is not on my thing right now. But if you can just take this back. There it is. And you have the control. So I'll let you discuss the discussion board, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
Great. So, yeah, we just wanted to spend a little bit of time today reviewing the discussion board. So as you know, we really have been trying to figure out ways to help you communicate with each other, and we had originally set up Basecamp, but due to problem with email communications, we decided to take that down. And I just wanted to take this time to encourage people to sign up, because we have a lot of questions that come in that clinics submit for other clinics, but then I think the discussion board is really the best place to put that. And so we just thought it would be easier if we maybe just reviewed it one more time, how to sign up. So I'm going to pull up my my page right here, my web page. One second. Okay, great. So I'm actually, going to start at our home page. So if you could go to our home page, then under Training and Resources, you see the Beam discussion board here on the left. And then you enter in the password, which was just reviewed on the slide. And we have the discussion board right here. Now I'm actually going to, sign myself out. So if you haven't signed up yet, then what you should do is you should register, and you should enter in a username, email, and password of your choice. And then, let's see, once you register, oops, I'm sorry about that. Okay, wait, let's just go back to the discussion board. Once you register, you can see the different questions that are here. And so we had one question come in from Melissa Carey, for example, asking if clinics would share what billing software they were using. And Yara responded. And so again, we just want to encourage you to post the discussion board questions that you have. You can sign up to subscribe via email if you wish and enter your email address there. And you can control the degree of email that you receive once you're logged into your account. So again, it's all here on our CTAC website, and we want to encourage you to take advantage of this as a resource to be able to communicate with each other. And because there's more than 85 clinics involved in this practice improvement network, there's a lot of information out there that you can share with each other. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Andy, and thank you.
Hey everybody, so I think we're just gonna we're just wrapping up. So just be mindful that next week, as always, we have our office hours related to that. So please fill out the survey or chat questions into Justine now with your questions, and we will go through all those. We're gonna try to make it. We're trying to make it more and more interactive over time. So we will go forward with that. And then in 2 weeks we'll have our conversion and analysis of CPT weighting, which we're really looking forward to, and we're also working with to get a more detailed analysis of the CPT changes that have happened in the state, and actually federally as well. A more deep dive into that as a webinar that will be open for all CTAC agencies sometime late April, beginning of May. So please keep that be mindful of that as we move forward. And as always, you have all our contact information, that kind of stuff. So I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar today.
And Andy?
Yes.
Can I actually jump in with one last piece?
Of course.
Yeah, so we did have a question come in asking if this would be different, if the discussion board is different from Basecamp, and it is. It's a completely different resource, so it's a bit confusing. So it's a listserv that can be used to communicate with each other, to post questions similar to other forums or discussion boards you might have used. And I also just wanted to announce, and you'd gotten an email from Jessica Rysel about this morning, is that due to many of your emails asking that we not require registration for every training, we have now figured out how to do it so you only need to register one time and you'll be registered for all future training. So we really appreciate your feedback on that. We knew it was really frustrating for you. And so we're hoping that this will make things a lot easier for you and not, save you that frustration every time you register for each of our events and feel that annoyance about it. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Justine. And again, thanks everybody for joining. And we are very excited that, we're doing this project with everybody. I want to thank especially Dave and Julie and Justine and Evelyn for managing both the logistics and also the content of today. And we will be speaking with many of you next week on the office hours, and then speaking with all of you again in 2 weeks on the CPT weighting webinar. So thank you again. Have a nice weekend, everybody, and we will talk soon. Take care, bye.